one thing you would change about Australian superannuation policy if you could?
What I would change, I would say hands off the superannuation. So I just want the government don't change anything, don't touch superannuation in any shape or form. Just let the industry deal with, obviously, the population which is getting older, with population which wants to support themselves when they retire. And this is a vehicle where people try to grow their future retirement nest. And the concessions which will have in the superannuation, they were made for that particular reason, that people can build their superannuation nest and support themselves and don't ask government for any support when they retire. So I wish the government just leave it alone, let it grow, let it thrive.
My guest today is Natalia Clack, founder of Easy Super, fellow of CPA Australia, approved SMSF auditor and superannuation specialist accountant of the year. Her firm Easy Super won SMSF Firm of the Year at the Australian Accounting Awards in 2025, and she spent more than 20 years in superannuation and runs one of the few Australian firms genuinely specialising in crypto and property compliance inside SMSFs. Today we're going to be touching on three main areas. So the first is changes to property investment regulations for SMSF trustees. The second is changes to tax and SMSF investment regulations for balances above $3 million. And thirdly, we're going to be touching on crypto in your SMSF, some of the custody requirements and compliance requirements around that. So Natalia, thanks so much for joining me.
James, thanks for inviting me.
All right. So Australia's SMSF sector now spans more than 672,000 funds holding over $1 trillion in assets. Natalia, is there a typical profile of somebody who sets up an SMSF, and how are you seeing that change across your client base?
So we see the typical profile of people who set up SMSF is usually it's a couple, say husband and wife, and they have anywhere between 200,000 and 1 million in their superannuation funds combined. And they decide that it's time for them to set up SMSF and to start investing their own superannuation and control their own superannuation.
Are you seeing more young people do it? So you mentioned couples. Are they generally younger people, or is it still, people in their 40s, 50s and 60s that have more capital?
Well, yeah, it's definitely changing. So we see a lot of younger people, and actually not only couples, there are single people as well, of course, setting up SMSFs. We see a lot of younger people in their 30s and even in their 20s setting up SMSF, even though they have a long way until they retire. They want to control their superannuation, they want to start investing, and they want to make sure that they do the right things for their future.
Do you think that's because a lot of the young investors think that they can outperform the traditional industry superannuation funds? And do you think that's a mistake, or do you think that the additional control does, generally yield a better result for clients setting up an SMSF?
This is why people set up SMSF. One of the reasons that people believe that they can outperform the industry or retail superannuation funds, and people are not happy with the returns. Say 5-7% return is not good enough for a lot of people, because people can easy use ChatGPT to estimate if my super is 200,000 and I'm getting 5% return, how much will I have by the time I retire? Say by the time I'm 60 or 65. And then they look at the number, they say it's not enough. So I'll have to do something about it. So I'm not going to end up in a situation where I don't have enough to retire comfortably. And this is why people set up SMSF, because they think, okay, I can do better job than retail or industry superannuation fund.
Yeah, interesting. I think from a personal point of view, myself and my wife, we set up a few years ago. Main reason was that when you look at the US markets, they've been performing at 15 to 20% now for more than 5 years. And within industry super funds, you're often limited to Australian equities with a small sleeve of international exposure. So I agree, it's that, more control to invest outside of Australia and change the weightings as you want. So shifting gears, can you talk us through what an LRBA is and what changed on August 10th?
Yes, limited recourse borrowing arrangement is where you can use your superannuation and you can invest in property and you can borrow against it. But the only one type of borrowing is allowed under superannuation legislation, which is called a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. It's called limited recourse because the recourse is limited to this particular property. So if, for example, your SMSF fails their property repayments, the lender can only take this particular property of you, and they cannot go after any other assets in SMSF or outside of SMSF. Because it's a limited recourse, it's quite a safe way of borrowing to leverage your superannuation. And what's happened I believe on the 24th of June 2026, the government decided that it's time to ban a limited recourse borrowing arrangement for residential properties. So we are talking about residential properties only, and we are talking about the ban, which will started already on the 10th of August because it went through royal assent very quickly. We know that government had an agreement with Greens, they supported it, and which is why the legislation passed very quickly. And from the 10th of August 2026, no one can borrow in self-managed superannuation fund in order to invest in residential property in a simple way. Because the simple way is when you find a property, leverage against it, and you have a deposit, say, for example, 20%, and you leverage 80%. This is a simple way. So there are other ways potentially how you can invest in residential property in the self-managed superannuation fund, but unfortunately, it's not a simple borrowing against it. With the commercial properties, you can still do it. So if, for example, you have SMSF or you want to establish SMSF and invest in commercial property, you still can borrow against this property and use your superannuation to invest in commercial property.
Gotcha. Well, that answers my next question, but I want to double click quickly on there's no simple way to invest in residential property. Can you tell us a little bit more about the complex or alternative methods where SMSF trustees can get exposure to residential property?
There are a few other ways how you can invest in residential property. There are, for example, ways where people invest, use a fractional investment, for example. This is where you buy, say, for example, units in unlisted unit trust, and you don't own the whole property, but you own a part of it. It's called fractional investment. There are options available on the market. There are other options, for example, when SMSF can invest as tenants-in-common with a related party or unrelated party. For example, two SMSFs can invest in one property and, for example, using tenants-in-common structure or unlisted unit trust structure as well. So a few SMSFs can come together again and invest in property. So there are ways how SMSF can still invest in property with the related party or unrelated party or using the fractional investments like I already described.
That's really interesting. Do you think that capital will shift into different investment opportunities, whether that's gold, crypto, commercial real estate, or private equity, whatever it may be?
I think the capital will definitely flow to different options. And like I mentioned, there are other options apart from the property, especially because the property is a little bit cold and hot, right? At the moment, it's cold asset because we know there are changes with taxation, how the property is getting taxed, and it affects the property pricing, and we don't know what will happen in the next 12 months or 24 months. So because of this uncertainty, a lot of people, I believe, will not invest in property again because of this uncertainty with the government and with the price, what will happen to the price when the tax changes will come into effect. And therefore, the capital will flow to other assets as well, such as a cryptocurrency, such as bullion, for example, such as a private debt, or even unlisted companies, because the SMSF can invest in unlisted companies as well. So I guess the people will start looking for the alternatives and will start looking for acceptable risk and return.
Interesting. With Division 296, and in addition to that, the changes to taxation as part of the budget proposal, there seems to be some things that have come out of it that are not great for superannuations potentially, which is this increased tax threshold for higher balances, but also an exemption for superannuation funds when it comes to changes to CGT discount calculation methods. Could you just walk us through, firstly, what is Division 296, how it works, and what it means for SMSF investors?
Division 296 is an additional tax which became a law from the 1st of July 2026. And this is an individual tax. So basically, if someone has a total superannuation balance, which means balances from all the superannuation funds which they have in Australia. So if someone has a total superannuation balance above 3 million at the 30th of June 2026 or 30th of June 2027, they will be paid an additional tax, which is calculated by using a special formula, and it's just additional 15% tax on the earnings, portion of earnings actually, above 3 million. It's not that scary like people think, because it's only additional tax on a portion of earnings. It's not tax on unrealized capital gain. So if you have not sold the asset, you are not paying any tax. It's only if you sell the asset and realize the capital gain, or you make money some other way. For example, you receive the interest, or you receive the dividends, for example, or staking rewards. So when it's realized income, when you do receive the income, this is when you pay tax. When you have not received the income, if you have not sold the assets, say cryptocurrency, you're not paying tax on unrealized gain. And this is, like I said, this is additional 15% tax if you have a balance between 3 million and 10 million, and it's per person, not per super fund. And if you have a balance above 10 million, you will be paying additional 10% tax to addition to 15%. So technically 25% tax. And then for the amount above 10 million. And then we also have the interesting thing like, for example, cost-based reset, where you can do a cost-based reset of your assets at 30th of June 2026. Again, if you have a good SMSF accountant or SMSF specialist, or if your accountant understands the Division 296, they will offer you this reset. And if you reset your assets, cost base of your assets at 30th of June 2026, then this additional tax will be calculated on a base, which is a market value of your assets at 30th of June 2026. That's important tip for your listeners. Talk to your accountant and make sure that you ask for this reset. It's important to understand that if your SMSF has an asset which has a capital loss or unrealized capital loss, it could be not a good idea to do the asset cost-based reset for your assets. So you have to check with your accountant again and make sure that you do the right things. Like I said, if it's unrealized gain, reset is a good thing. If it's unrealized loss, reset is not a good thing.
That's very interesting. So just using the crypto market as an example, let's say that I held $1 million in Bitcoin for 5 years and I haven't sold any in my SMSF, and my average purchase price was, let's say, $30,000 US, and today the average price is $63,000 US. I could reset my cost base to $63,000 without realizing the gain along the way. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So your accountant will have to have two cost bases. So first is a cost base for the tax, because the tax will be taxed still based on the actual cost of your assets. So you will have to pay 15% tax or 10% tax. If you hold the assets for more than 12 months in SMSF, you pay 10% tax. You still will be paying 10% tax. So you can't escape it. But for Division 296, additional tax, again, if your balance is above 3 million only, you'll have a second cost base, which you can reset at 30th of June 2026.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So in terms of this new regulation, do you think it will change investors' behavior in terms of active versus passive investment strategies? So, for example, if you invest in a fund that can trade on your behalf, cut, losses, or even, trim some of the winning positions, you're not necessarily paying a capital gains tax because you're holding the fund and you haven't sold the fund yet. Whereas if you manage all of the individual positions yourself, it's perhaps less tax efficient.
I guess it depends as well. So obviously it depends which fund, it depends how it's all set up, it depends what you do individually. One of the important things to understand is when you set up a SMSF, you are in the driver's seat. So you are responsible for all your investment decisions. So I encourage all my clients or new clients or old clients, I always encourage them to start educating yourself. So start educating yourself in terms of finances, in terms of the tax, in terms of what Division 296, for example, means for you. So because having this knowledge and knowing what's going on, like I said, with tax, with investments, with the politics, will get you into the better position rather than relying on someone doing it for you. So if you, for example, want to rely on someone doing it for you, maybe it's better for you to stay in the industry or retail superannuation fund. So knowledge is a power. And in terms of, like I said, choosing between investing in the fund, so using the fund structure, or investing like yourself individually in a particular, say, for example, cryptocurrency. Again, everyone has different investment strategy, and I've seen the cases when people do either of the methods and they succeed, and I've seen the cases that people obviously fail with their investments because they have not had enough knowledge to be able to make a right choice for their investments.
You've also posted recently about the estate planning consequences of Division 296. Can you explain what are some of those considerations people should have?
It is very simple. People should start thinking, for example, $3 million per person. When we talk about Division 296, right? We talk about 3 million. A lot of people say, you know what, I will never get there. I only have 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000. However, you should start thinking about what if I have, for example, a husband and my husband passes away. And what if his super will become my super? Will I reach this $3 million? Will I reach this $3 million threshold, or I still will be below this threshold? It's example number one. Example number two, say, for example, I have insurance in my SMSF. Again, and my husband has insurance in our SMSF. Say, for example, I pass away, right? So let's kill me this time. If I pass away and my husband will inherit my super plus my insurance payout, which will go to the SMSF, will he reach this $3 million threshold? These are the questions you have to ask yourself. And then it might change your estate planning. You might have a different estate planning and you might decide differently where you want superannuation to go based on this $3 million threshold, which potentially you can reach or your husband can reach when one of you passes away. So this is, where you should talk again, you should talk to the specialist. You should talk to the estate planning lawyer when you do your will or when you redo your will, when you do your enduring power of attorney. You should think about how this will affect your tax in case if you pass away, or not your tax, but tax of someone who inherits your super, basically.
Could you touch on quickly just the separation between somebody's superannuation and their will? Because they're actually treated quite differently unless you deliberately link them, isn't it? So could you touch on that?
Yeah, so your will doesn't cover your superannuation automatically. You have to have a separate arrangement for your superannuation, and most common way how people usually decide where or how they treat their superannuation when they pass away is using binding death benefit nomination. Binding death benefit nomination, which is actually commonly used by the industry and retail superannuation funds as well. Binding death benefit nomination where you nominate the person who you want your money, your superannuation to go to after you pass away. When you pass away, you have a choice. Like I said, if you use binding death benefit nomination, it could go to the nominated person. However, a nominated person could be only someone who is dependent on the SIS Act. Dependence on the SIS Act, is it your spouse or your partner, your children, or legal personal representative. There is now one like when you're interdependent relationship with someone, but it's very hard to prove. So think about it in a way. If I do binding death benefit nomination, I can only nominate my partner, my spouse, my children, or legal personal representative. I cannot nominate my neighbor, for example. I cannot nominate my cousin. I cannot nominate my brother, sister, or father or mother. So, and this is another mistake which a lot of people do, especially in the industry or retail superannuation funds. We've seen binding death benefit nominations with nominated person such as, for example, cousin. It's not valid straight away. So it's a waste of your time even filling up the form. So it's important to understand, and again, talk to the specialist, talk to the estate lawyer, talk to the solicitor who can organize estate planning for your SMSF, binding death benefit nomination, and will as well. So if binding death benefit nomination nominates a legal personal representative, which is a state, then your superannuation will go to a state and will be covered by the will. But only then it will be covered by the will, not automatically.
Shifting gears to crypto within SMSFs more specifically now. We've seen more than a 50% drawdown since October 2025 for Bitcoin and the crypto market more broadly. I think at one point you mentioned more than 70% of your clients, were setting up an SMSF. At least part of the reason was so that they could invest in crypto more easily, which is quite difficult with an industry super fund. Have you seen the number of SMSFs being set up to invest in crypto decline? What are some of the patterns you've seen given that we've been in this bear market now for 9 to 10 months?
We definitely seen a decline because of the bear market, which is expected. A lot of people are a little bit cautious about investing in crypto, especially in the current market. So I would say that it switched from 70% to probably more like 40%, because it was we had a lot of clients investing in property in the last 3 to 4 months. Property was a flavor of a few months, and especially because of the ban of limited recourse borrowing arrangement, people were rushing in. They were trying to set up everything and sign the contract before the 10th of August. However, I think it's coming back. The cryptocurrency is coming back, and people started inquiring more and more about setting up SMSF and investing in crypto, because you probably know that there is a view that it's a bear market and it's the bottom of the bear market. Again, it's not a financial advice. I don't know what's going to happen with the market, but a lot of people are very keen to invest at that point in time because they believe that it's a bottom or near bottom. Again, I don't know personally. I'm not telling you that you should do it. I'm just saying that we've seen increase in inquiries again in the past probably 4 to 6 weeks.
When some of these people look to set up an SMSF and invest in crypto and try to buy the bottom of the market, what are some of the most common mistakes that they make when setting up the SMSF?
I think the most common mistake is that people think that they have, for example, low balance and they can set up a SMSF, invest in cryptocurrency, and somehow magically their balance will get like X 100X return in a couple of years. I've seen it over and over again that people are over optimistic about cryptocurrency and they set up SMSF with the low balances. I think it's the biggest mistake for people because you have to understand, yes, we had a bull market and a lot of people made a lot of money. However, we have a bear market at the moment and we don't know when it will finish. And you have to be able to hold on to it through the bear market as well. So if you invest in crypto, and it's very hard for people when they have low balances because it's very disheartening. They can see the balance is it's dropping and they panic. They sell. As we know, a lot of people cannot handle the bear market. Psychologically, they sell, and it means when you sell, you realize the loss. It means that's it. There is no way back. Again, I'm not saying don't sell. I'm just saying that you have to take a full responsibility when you set up a SMSF and be aware of there is a market which can go up and there is a market which can go down, and you have to be able to handle it emotionally and psychologically and go through the growth process, basically.
Australians lost over $160 million to crypto scams in 2025. What are some of the common scams you've seen from trustees investing in crypto?
You know what? We do have clients who lost money as well. And what I've noticed that there is one common thing with every single client who lost money. They have too much trust, and like they trust someone. Say, for example, they see the advertising on YouTube or on even TV, and they trust. They don't check. They trust this advertiser, and they invest their money and they lose money. Or they trust someone who calls them, for example, and pretends to be someone who they are not. Again, this is another thing, but again, they trust someone. So I think, like with people, especially investing in cryptocurrency, I think one of the most important thing to protect themselves from scams is before you do anything with your money or with your cryptocurrency, you have to pause and think. And sometimes you have to pause maybe even for days before acting on someone's call or some advertising you see on TV or someone recommended you something. Just pause and think about it, sleep on it, and then, act only when you thought about it, checked it, thought about it again, and maybe even ask your accountant or someone who you trust. What do you think? Do you think, it's a trusted provider, or do you think it's a trusted source, or it's a trusted advertiser? Just don't jump into things. That's the most important thing, I think, when we talk about scams.
100% agree. We see a lot of scams, and if you're wondering what are a couple of good ways to check, every business should have an Australian business number. Check when it was registered, check where it was registered. Do they have a financial services license? Or if they're an exchange, they're going to need a financial services license eventually, but are they based in Australia? There's lots of DeFi platforms or overseas platforms that have no registration. There's nobody behind the company really, or just the scammer. And so people, invest in that because it looks nice on the website. So yeah, do your checks and absolutely take your time before sending money in crypto. It's very hard to get it back once it's gone.
Yeah. I would say it's impossible to get it back once it's gone. That's it. Once it's gone, it's gone. So unfortunately.
So there was actually a Coldcard compromise. So a Coldcard is a type of hardware device that people were storing their Bitcoin on. And the method by which the seed phrase was generated was compromised, which meant that hackers could effectively guess people's seed phrases and drain the Bitcoin from their self-custody wallets. So there's been this shift towards both exchange custody, or for people using self-custody, using what's called multi-signature custody, where you need multiple devices, ideally from multiple manufacturers, in order to authorize a transaction. So it removes that single point of failure. As somebody who works in the SMSF space, do you lean more towards people holding assets in self-custody because of, SMSF segregation requirements? Or do you, lean towards exchanges, or are you agnostic? What's sort of the pros and cons of each?
I guess, I move with the times. So a couple of years ago, I know that exchanges and brokers, they were considered to be less safe, I would say. Again, it was just a perception because of the failure of a few exchanges, as we know, like large exchanges, and people were more cautious about keeping their cryptocurrency on the exchange. This was like 2-3 years ago, even a year ago. I think it's shifted in the last 12 months, and especially with Coldcard, a card like you mentioned, a compromise. I know we do have clients using it, and we did receive a lot of phone calls. Again, we are not a provider we don't provide the security for the cold cards, but the thing is that people are asking, if I do A, B, C, D, can I do it in my SMSF because I need to move the money from cold wallet, for example. So that's now shifting. So now people started looking back to the exchanges, to the brokers, and we look at it and consider it sometimes to be safer. Again, I cannot guarantee anything. I don't work for any exchange or any broker. But what we've noticed is this is a shift which is happening because a lot of people, say, for example, people have Coldcard. We've seen we've seen cases, or cold wallet, sorry. We've seen cases when people would lose the seed phrase, even like without compromise or without any breaches. People can lose the seed phrase. People can forget where they keep it, for example. I know it sounds weird, but people, forget things. Or someone, for example, only one person knows where the cold wallet is and another person in the SMSF doesn't know. And if something happens to this first person, who controls it, who can access it. So we've seen a lot of cases where, because of the nature of the cold wallet, it's like it's controlled by someone, and you have to physically have access to it. Because of the nature, the things could go wrong. When you have your crypto is on exchange, the things are slightly different. There is a risk, exchange risk, obviously, because of course exchange potentially could get hacked. The things might go wrong with the exchanges as well. However, I think the industry has matured in the past 3 to 4, 5 years, and became, like I said, more mature. What it means that most Australian-based exchanges would have AFSL, or they have applied for AFSL, because you can't operate on the Australian market without AFSL from the 1st of July 2026, or at least you should have applied by that time. When you apply for AFSL, it's a completely different level of the requirements, of the government requirements. You have to have a proof of reserves, you have to tick a lot of boxes and jump through a lot of hoops to get to the point where you get this license. It provides a certain level of security for people, because it means, that exchange does have, for example, proof of reserves. What it means that whatever exchange is showing on your statement, say, for example, you get a statement from the exchange, it shows you hold 2 Bitcoins. It means that this exchange actually has this proof of reserves. If they have this proof of reserve, it means they do hold these 2 Bitcoins. It's not just a paper cryptocurrency. It exists and it's sitting in some cold storage, for example, of this particular exchange. So you have sort of sense of security because of AFSL, which this exchange holds. And this is why the people started looking at the exchanges as a more secure compared to what it was 2 or 3 years ago. The other thing is, if something goes wrong, for example, you forget your login, or God forbid, someone passes away, their relatives, legal personal representative, estate, they can access the person who passed away, they can access their account on the exchange, even without having a physical access. Because with the cold wallet, for example, if someone passes away and no one knows where this cold wallet is, no one knows the seed phrase, the crypto is gone. You can't restore it because the person is gone, the crypto is gone. With the exchanges, you do have more secure, I guess, estate planning situation, because the people, like I said, the legal personal representative can access, but providing the certain documents, they can access the account of the deceased person. That's the other reason why people think, at least if something happens to me, my husband or my wife can access my crypto because it's on exchange. There are a lot of pros and cons with exchanges and with the cold wallets. Again, we don't push you towards one or another. It's up to you. You can choose. We support you any decision, but you have to understand the differences and you have to understand the risks. And again, you have to take responsibility for the risks you are taking.
When it comes to year-end reporting for an SMSF that holds cryptocurrency, and let's say, for example, you hold a Bitcoin on exchange and you hold a Bitcoin in self-custody, can you just walk through how does a trustee make it easy to go through that audit process? What are you looking for? Because some people, they might do a screenshot of their balance on an exchange, but as you would know, it's quite easy to falsify a screenshot these days. So what are the requirements that you need on both an exchange and a self-custody side?
Exchange it's very, very easy. You just have to log into your exchange. You go to the reports section. Every exchange has some section which is called reports, year-end reports or tax, something like that. And you go to that section and you look for 2025 or 6, depends on which year you're doing. Reports, year-end reports. You download all your reports, you send it to your accountant, and that's it. It is as simple as that. With exchanges, you have to understand again, because as the auditor, because I'm a SMSF auditor, as the auditor, when I receive this type of reports, I can ask exactly the same question. How do I know these reports has not been done in some software, for example? Or how do I know that this exchange holds this crypto? How do I know? Because the thing that which they're showing doesn't mean that they're holding it. However, like I said, with Australian exchanges now need to hold FSL. If they show you have 2 Bitcoins, it means they would have these 2 Bitcoins safe somewhere, say in a cold wallet, for example. In terms of the exchange itself and reporting itself, you have when as an auditor, what I look for, I look at type 2 GS007 type 2 audit report. This is a report where the auditors audit the exchange and they audit the internal systems, internal controls, including the proof of reserves, and they issue the audit report saying that, for example, we audited this exchange and we can confirm that they do have internal systems and controls for their reporting. So as the auditor, in that case, I can accept this report without need to qualify the SMSF audit report. I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but as the auditor, like I said, when someone sends me a report from the exchange, how do I know this report is correct? How do I know that crypto is still there? This GS007 type 2 audit report helps me, and I can rely on it. And this is where I will not qualify the audit report, part A of audit report, if the exchange doesn't have this report, because most exchanges will not have this report. At least this financial year, I haven't heard if anyone is getting this report. It doesn't mean that these reports could not be accepted. These reports from exchanges could not be accepted. It just means that most auditors will qualify the part A of audit report. The qualification means that the auditor cannot guarantee, could not confirm that this crypto exists. That's it. That's as simple like that. The same with cold wallets, the similar situation. If you send me the screenshots, again, how do I know that these screenshots haven't been done by ChatGPT, for example? So what I need to do, I need to ask you for the public address, and I will go to the public address and I will check myself what is the holdings there. However, with the public address, I think a trick is, how do I know that this address belongs to your super fund? You could give me any address, like how do I know it's a super fund's address and not some random public address? So this is the other thing we have. We have like trustee declarations. We have different other ways to prove that this wallet belongs to this particular super fund. Another thing is that how do I know that you still can access your cold wallet? Because people can lose the seed phrase, and losing the seed phrase or losing the access to your cold wallet, it's the same like losing the crypto. Essentially, it's not yours anymore. This is the other thing we need to prove as the auditors. So there is no right or wrong answer, even from the auditor's point of view. It's just the answer that it depends on the evidence you provide. You provide to me as the auditor. If you provide the right evidence, right reporting, I will not qualify the audit report. If you don't provide me the right evidence and reporting, for example, GS007 type 2 audit report, because it's not up to you, it's up to exchange to pay to the auditor to audit their systems, which a lot of exchanges don't want to do. Not just like don't want to do, but like it's just additional cost for them and a hassle. So we just qualify the part A of audit report as the auditors.
Makes sense. Now, if someone's in their 40s and 50s and hasn't taken control of their super yet, what's the single highest impact move they can do over the next 12 months?
I think just start watching your superannuation balance and understanding how much return you are getting every year, being in industry or retail superannuation fund. It's number one. Number two, check the fees you're paying, because one of the objections we have that, when I set up SMSF, there are fees I have to pay every year. However, there are fees you have to pay in the industry and retail superannuation fund as well. So go to your statement at 30th of June. I think it's a page, usually 5, 6, 7, fine print, fees and charges, read the fine print and calculate yourself how much fees you're paying. So you could compare the fees you'll be paying in SMSF versus the fees you're paying in the industry or retail superannuation fund. Plus, if you have, for example, husband and wife, you look at the both balances and you add the fees together, because in SMSF you'll be paying one set of fees. You can have 2 members, you can have up to 6 members, and you'll pay one set of fees, not 2 set of fees, not 6 set of fees. So you can do that. And number 3, start your financial literacy education. In some shape or form. It doesn't matter if you follow some influencer or you start doing some course, for example, if it's crypto or shares or anything you are interested in or you believe in certain, like, because people believe in certain asset classes and they don't believe in other asset classes. Just start your education, start being interested in your financial future. And this will lead you to, I guess, like when you're ready, it will lead you to the decision to start controlling your superannuation, which you can do only in the way of setting up SMSF and starting investment and potentially making more than 5 or 7% a year, like your industry or retail superannuation funds.
Natalia, it's been a great interview and a podcast. So thank you so much for all of your insights across all these different areas. I feel like I always learn something when I'm talking to you. I've got 3 more questions for you. So today,
thanks, James.
Crypto is worth roughly $3 billion, give or take, in terms of what's held in SMSFs in Australia. Now, that's 0.3% of the assets, the more than $1 trillion assets in SMSFs. Looking out in 10 plus years, what do you think will be the percentage of a portfolio held in digital assets?
I think because the digital assets will change and mature and diversify in a different projects, which we already started seeing emerging. I think the people will invest more in the digital assets as a class. I'm not talking about crypto only. I'm talking about the digital assets, which is much more than just cryptocurrency. I definitely think that some of superannuation money will flow into the digital assets in the digital economy. However, we have to understand that obviously we do have the government which doesn't encourage SMSF in general. So we will have to see how it will affect the future flow. Say, for example, if there is nothing will change in terms of the legislation, I could see potentially the percentage of assets held in superannuation and invested in digital economy grow to maybe 10, 15, even 20%. However, if the government will intervene, which again, we don't know what will happen, then it will change the situation.
What's one thing you would change about Australian superannuation policy if you could?
What I would change, I would say hands off the superannuation. So I just want the government don't change anything, don't touch superannuation in any shape or form. Just let the industry deal with, obviously, the population which is getting older, with population which wants to support themselves when they retire. And this is a vehicle where people try to grow their future retirement nest. And the concessions which will have in the superannuation, they were made for that particular reason, that people can build their superannuation nest and support themselves and don't ask government for any support when they retire. So I wish the government just leave it alone, let it grow, let it thrive. And again, it will benefit all of us including, the rest of Australians, even who don't have, like superannuation, in a way that, again, all the population will be able to look after themselves using their superannuation assets, rather than rely on the government and rely on the younger people working harder, paying more tax, and supporting the older generation. So that's my wishes. Just leave it alone.
Fully agree. I think the government intervenes enough, so keep the hands off. And the last question is, what is the best way people can chat to Natalia and Easy Super? Where can they find you?
You can go on our website, easysuper.au, and book a session with myself. And we can have a 10-minute chat, no financial advice, obviously, but we can talk about your superannuation. We can talk about the way we can assist you to grow your super.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time today, Natalia. And we really appreciate all the information you've given us. So if you want to find out more, head over to easysuper.au, as Natalia said. And if you are interested in setting up a digital asset brokerage account, you can reach out to myself at james@alphanode.global. Thanks so much for listening.